All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord Q&A. We have Ben Sanford with us tonight from tribaledge.life. Thanks for being here, Ben.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.
So you had a recent Voices with Viveki where you talked a lot about John stuff, but we didn't actually get to hear, except for some teasers of a lot about you. So we thought we'd have you on and get your history and dive into the primal arts, as you've called it. So,
Awesome.
but before we get there, so tell us about your journey. How did you get into all this? Where did you come from?
Um, well, so I live in Washington State, the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State, kind of in a still somewhat of a wild space on the country. And I just grew up as a kid running around in the woods barefoot, playing outside, building forts, climbing trees. And like to say, I just kind of never stopped. You know, I kind of grew up, but that part never left. So in the process of doing that, I came across some, uh, well, I lived in a small community and didn't have a lot of resources in terms of, well, like today, obviously, didn't have the internet, didn't have all the ways to get plugged in. And I had interests in martial arts, for example, uh, wilderness skills, healing, all of these different kind of elements that later have come together to be what I call the primal arts. And first it was through books. One of my teachers now, Tom Brown Jr., was has a book called The Tracker, which I'm familiar with. But um, when I was for a 14-year-old mind, it was really expansive and really kind of created a context for my exploration in the wild. And so um, through that and finding, my local resources that I could find, I just kept playing and kept kind of following my heart and ended up not going through traditional education, um, much to my parents, chagrin. It was they were very supportive, but still a lot of my immediate community was kind of like, "What are you doing, boy?" It was kind of a different, unconventional education. So anyway, started training with Tom Brown when I was 21. I went to a school, and through my 20s was basically seeking, just like a 20-year-old, seeking adventure and putting these skills into action and testing this stuff out. But always, even since I was younger, had a calling to, in some way, have some sort of a training community or hub. And it's kind of hard for me to remember even now what that original picture was, because it's certainly different than I imagined at the time. But so it was through um, basically my self-created education of these long training immersions, basically like these week-long, multi-week-long experiences, and then it kind of in a traditional, meaning like an old traditional way, like in the old days with martial arts, you would go visit the master for like a week, and he would give you the basics and be like, okay, I'll see you in a year. Go test it out. Go do what you can. So it's that kind of mentoring and that kind of education. So I would go and have these deep immersive experiences, and then come back and practice and train and find friends who were into it. And then over time, I guess about 15 years ago, so in 2002, I started just a simple. Our first thing was a gathering of just I would light a fire here at my land and invite people to come out and just be together, and eventually started to, as I was working on kind of integrating all of this stuff that I've been working on, creating a curriculum, eventually started to provide some classes, training opportunities. Like anything, when you just kind of dive into it and allow it to teach you, it basically unfolded in unpredictable, emergent ways, So, um, including a community that formed around it, and just got super deep, really powerful. And so I've been transformed completely by just having a vision and going for it, and you know, trying to uh, trying to listen and manifest it in the way that was it was calling me. And then, so more recently, I guess, when did John start his series, Awakening Crisis? Was that 2 years ago? About a little over. So it was shortly after that. I think it was June, is what I remember. A couple years ago, I ran into that series through Jordan Peterson, um, and I was really inspired by Jordan's work, but then came across John's, and there's something about his, I think it's the cognitive science perspective, that just was mind blowing, and gave me such a powerful language system for kind of this metaphorical indigenous language that I had been mentored through, So it kind of gave me a really grounded way and a applied way to look at this stuff. So I guess that's how I got to, and then I just emailed John. I was just kind of a fan letter and was like, hey, this is what I do. If you're interested in talking sometime.
Well, yeah, John
That's
really,
about how I got here.
yeah, is interested in this type of thing. He's had Rafe Kelly on a number of times. We talked to Rafe too. So what he seems to do is taking nature and turning it into a jungle gym. What you
Right.
describe seems to have that as one aspect of it, but it sounds like it goes a lot deeper in terms of your relationship with nature. Would that be
Yeah.
accurate?
And full respect to what Rafe's doing. I love his project. I'm sure has a lot of depth that's not readily available. But yeah, there's a so we do have a movement aspect, for example. So there is like a jungle or a gym aspect, and there's I guess the fundamental approach is making contact with the earth, with yourself, and in that process, uh, you're moving with, not through nature. So one of our, just as a quick example, one of our core practices is a skill called stalking, and it's not creepy stalking necessarily like on Facebook, but it's the ability to move within the baseline of your environment in a way that does not disturb it. So it's super instinctive. I mean, this is something we've done forever in terms of hunting and all that. But when you kind of study it as a practice, and it turns into this like woods tai chi kind of woods yoga kind of thing. But and usually there's a purpose for it. So we end up incorporating games, doing like that. So at first, when people get into these things, they kind of just have this like curiosity, and I feel like a lot of that's instinctive. It's just kind of like, yeah, something feels right about this. But then they get into it and realize that it's just endless depth of kind of this cyclical, transformative experience. As you get better at the thing, it's informing you, and your connection to the earth is deepening. We are nature too, so there's no, if you're learning more about nature, you're learning more about yourself. So,
Oh, and just say I didn't mean to downplay what Rafe is doing. I think what he's doing is
of
fantastic too.
course,
What both of you guys are doing, it's such a far cry from my life, and 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 then it makes me wonder. I think I think about this kind of things you're doing, and I think how could I do that? So how do you what do you say to people today who are not used to living out in the wilderness, and we probably are not as in touch with a lot of us not as in touch with nature, and what is there for us in what you're doing, and what would it afford us if we just decided to look?
yeah. Um, well, it's kind of one of my favorite things to do is to really, part of what I do, I feel like, is just remind people of what they already know. So certainly we all have limitations and physically and whatnot, even just stuff like time and geography. But even with physical limitations, is usually one of the first things that comes up. Is people are concerned about, well, I don't know if I could do that. They might see someone do something cool, like climbing a tree or whatever. But I really focus on enhancing the nature that you are already. So everyone's got, I mean, if you look at this just historically through our evolutionary development, I mean, everyone's got this like ancestral memory at a cellular level in a way, something so deep that you put people in, you can take on, I mean, at some level, in some situations, like really equalizing kind of leveling situations, everyone reacts the same, and we all have similar capacities. Usually we see that under extreme conditions where people, it's life and death or whatever, but sure enough, everyone acts pretty much the same, so there is this like super deep primal capacity that we all have. And I think what we can do with folks that don't, aren't maybe, usually the issue is just you're not familiar with it. And so it's familiarizing and remembering and reawakening is kind of really what it is. So it's more of a removal process than an adding process. So if I can help someone make contact with the earth in a way that's, I don't know, it's not as hard as you think. It's super subtle, and I certainly don't push people beyond their means. The nature itself tells us, that that just doesn't work. Conservation of energy, all these principles of survival just go, no. It's all about slow down, be more still, listen more, and these things, which almost everyone can do that, So it starts out with a very efficient, slow, grounded, connected mode, and then as your attributes become more awake, become more familiar with your environment, you're able to perform, say, at the higher level or do cool stuff or whatever,
So well, I'd like to get more into the theory, but what you just said makes me wonder, would you be able to suggest an exercise for the rank beginner of what we could do to just have some tuning into what you've been talking about? Like what could we do today?
Like
just go outside and
right
do
now?
Right now.
Yeah. So there's a practice, and it's in a way familiar to probably most people here because it's essentially a type of meditation. I mean, I think probably the simplest answer would be to go outside, and it doesn't even have to be the wild nature. It can be your backyard. It could just be a tree in your yard or a plant. There can be cars going by. All that stuff doesn't matter. But ideally, if you can get to a little park, or if you have a little, often in cities, even the greenbelt areas, the areas in between, the transition areas, is where all the life is happening, where the humans are and the squirrels and everything. So, but basically, there's a number of practices for just simply making contact with nature, and it's the first one is called a sit spot, or a sacred area is what we call it. It's some place where you feel relatively safe, alone, and undisturbed, and it's got some element of the wild, whether it's I mean, you can literally be sitting on your back porch and just have like a tree in front of you. It doesn't have to be like the whole panorama, but something where you feel it's like a little corner, like where you might, as a kid, you might go kind of hide out. And kids have these places naturally, and they make forts there. But it's tapping back into that part of you that knows how to play like that. And if you can find this little secret spot and just sit down, if it allows you to sit down and slow down and just use your senses, it's really like practicing. I'm sure a number of people here practice mindfulness meditation as John's teaching it, but it's a similar practice, but using your full sensory awareness. So you're allowing, rather than say just focusing on the breath, allowing yourself to just be present to what's going on around you, all the sound, all that stuff. So I think that's one of the simplest things. It's just it sounds too simple, but it's literally maybe take your shoes off and go outside, and if your environment's not too cold or whatever, but it's the stuff we do is that easy, and it's just encouraging people to take a certain perspective or creating a context for that, which is where it goes from just being, well, I'm just going outside to, no, this is a transformative. I just help people. I just help frame stuff so people get more out of it.
Right. So you talk about transformative experience, and we talk a lot about that here too. So, what does that mean to you to have a transformative experience? And
Um, I would say, I guess, in a simple way, to make contact with some aspect of reality that you are no longer the same afterwards. So, um, generally, in the transformation that I'm seeking, or we're working towards, is on a developmental type of way. So it's kind of a transcending and including the previous states. So rather than abandoning something and trying to be something else, it's more of a, yeah, I'm all this, including all the stuff that I'm not excited about, and can I expand it into something new that also holds all that and allows me to see differently. So I guess in a simple way.
you talk about what you do is following the primal arts, and you mention on your site that it's based on I don't know if it's the work of, but based on grandfather stalking wolf. What can you tell us first? What are the primal arts, and who was grandfather stalking wolf?
Sure. So just to make a distinction, like my representation of the education I got from Tom and Stalking Wolf, who I'll talk about, my distillation of that and kind of integrating that into our approach is what I refer to as the primal arts. So that's um, not necessarily what he calls it, just to be clear, but and I can talk about both, but I'll start with Stalking Wolf and that story a little bit. Really fascinating story, and so Tom Brown is a native of New Jersey, native meaning a white hick from New Jersey. He lived out in the Pine Barrens, and when he was 7 years old, he was out looking for fossils nearby woods. He met Stalking, who was his friend at the time, Tom's. It was Rick, who was his grandfather. And so Stalking Wolf was a Apache elder. He was a shaman or medicine man, and also a scout, which was a certain archetypal role within the tribe there. But he was from the southern Lipan Apache people in the southwest near the Mexican border. And Stalking Wolf was in his 80s when he met Tom, and this would have been uh, probably early 50s. Tom is now 72, I think. So 70, sorry. So it's some time ago. So Stalking Wolf was kind of this character who walked out of time in a sense, because he's in his 80s and he had spent his life dedicated to the preservation of skills of living with the earth that were being lost due to the expansion of our Western um, destruction of that culture and people. And so Stalking Wolf, Tom also referred to as grandfather, and in their culture, grandfather was kind of it was a generic term that basically meant anyone you respected that was older than you, kind of like uncle, or even teacher. It was almost like sensei. So grandfather Stalking Wolf, that's how it translated. So when Stalking Wolf was young, he was living in a culture that was still relatively intact, and it was a very deep, you know, it's profoundly deep. The teachings that have been passed on through Tom, through his school and books and whatnot, and it's just it's one of the most beautiful, intact approaches to being, and it's just, you see these modes of being that have survived ancient these ancient ways of being that have survived are really destructive approach to clashing with these cultures. But the ones that have survived, we see see how they were mistaken as being savage or barbaric or whatever. And if we just slow down for a little bit and listen, we just pay attention and open our hearts a bit, it's profound, the depth of wisdom and teaching that's available there. It's almost like talking to their world, just living in it, and their connection and whatnot. So anyway, so Stalking Wolf was in a people that was living really close to the earth, and they were he was living with a group of elders and children that had recently, he was a young boy, he was like 2 years old when his tribe was massacred. And the warrior people, the warrior ages, so the men and women that were all the adults and the teenagers on up to the old folks, were pretty much wiped out. His parents were killed. So he was adopted by these elders. And instead of going to the reservation and instead of fighting, his clan decided to just disappear, which was a skill set they had. They just decided to become like the deer and to evade and escape and live invisibly amongst this change and transformation that was going
on. What year approximately are we talking about there?
This would be around, Stalking Wolf was born in 1889, I think, so early 1900s, first decade of the 1900s. So they, they were constantly living outside, much like you hear stories of Geronimo, where he was evading the U.S. cavalry for, basically they never caught him, he surrendered, but it was that kind of lifestyle, but without the fighting, they would just evade. And it's interesting because people are often like, how could you do that with a whole group of people? You can't live that way. But I point out, as we're sitting there at a class at my land it's on the edge of a wilderness. I'm like, well, the deer are here right now. They're all around doing their thing. They're living really close by, and they're feeding and they're raising their young. And they're taking care of all their needs, and we never see them. It's like, where are they? We only see them when they let us. They kind of come out for a bit. So
is that a life of is that a life of fear, or are they're just so good at hiding, I guess, that they can just live peacefully and not just always be looking over their shoulder?
Yeah, it's I wouldn't say fear, I would say awareness. It was a life of, they had the skill to well, it's amazing how much people miss. Yeah, especially in the woods. I mean, it's really not hard. It's one of the skill sets I've been interested, actually, is this whole idea of invisibility and camouflage and stalk. That's part of work stalking. But it's amazing how easy it is to not be seen, actually, if you want to, and to have a whole culture that's been practicing that for a long time, and they just lived so differently than the people that were, the Westerners that were coming in. It was such a contrast that it would just be, you would disappear like an animal, But so, but there was certainly hypervigilance, and they had a whole system designed to protect the people and everything. And that's part of what the scout role was the eyes and the ears of the people. And so it wasn't just, hope we aren't caught. It was an investment. It's part of the whole thing. And I think you see that in most cultures that I've researched, at least indigenous cultures had their protector. They had the people that were on the edge of the tribe, so to speak. Might be a reference to what Tribal Edge is about, by the way. So anyway, so just to kind of get back through the story, Stalking Wolf, when he was a young man, ended up being recognized as having some gifts in terms of not just gifts, and like he, the elders kind of would of their tribe back then, and even now. I mean, that's kind of the elder role, is to observe the gifts of the young people, to nurture those things, and to help them cultivate them, and have the wisdom to be able to give them assignments and give them little missions and give them ways of learning stuff that empowers them, empowers their. And so he went through all the tests and rites of passages of his culture, and around when he was an early or late teen, I believe around 20 years old, he left his people. It was a difficult decision because they had never made contact directly with the Western world yet. And so he left, and he was called by vision to wander and seek out elders and teachers, and try to preserve the skills of living with the earth, and the spiritual skills as well, that the ceremony and all these awareness from anyone he could find, because there was they called it prophecy. I don't know what we want to call it now, but they knew things were changing, and they could see the signs, whether it was obviously the massacres and whatnot being erased off the earth. So they wanted to preserve all this stuff that was lost. So he spent, this is hard to believe, but he spent 63 years wandering and collecting from any people he could find, native people that were still intact, from elders, and he traveled through North America, South America, East and West, and did this, on foot. He did this wandering in the old way, and he would be called from one place, and in some of these places he would actually go to where the people had lived, because they had already been erased, and he could, at that point, being a tracker and profoundly aware, would be able to tap into that landscape, if you will, and that place, and actually access some of it some level. So anyway, so then Stalking Wolves, that leaves him up to about in his late 80s. Early 80s, he meets Tom Brown as a 7-year-old kid, and he proceeds, because he'd been looking for a student. He's like, well, what good does this do if I die with this? And he proceeds to download his distillation knowledge and principles, and Tom has an interesting 10-year experience with Stalking Wolf. Ends up as a 18-year-old young man going, I live in a different world now. What the heck was that? Because he went through the old way of teaching. He was mentored by Stalking Wolf, and that's what all the books are about that Tom's written, is his experiences. Wow. And then, and finally, Tom began teaching when he was 29 or 30, I think. He wrote The Tracker, his first book, and then he opened up a school, and he's been since 1978. And then I got over there in 1995, going back and forth, learning from him since then.
Wow.
Long story, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a great story.
Fascinating.
And I was thinking it would make a pretty good movie, it sounds like, too.
It would make an amazing movie, yeah.
But so and I want to get a little more into the primal, so these primal arts. You talk about 4 directions. So what are these 4 directions?
So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the idea of the medicine wheel as a kind of psychotechnology.
No, I'm not, at least. So if you could tell us about it, that would be great.
It's, they're kind of they're found around the world. It's a methodology of it's a representation of process, a representation of life, and it's a way of kind of holding knowledge and wisdom in a sense. So it's one of those tools that could be aligned. Like Taoism has a version with
I can't talk right now.
Symbology and whatnot. So you see these all over the place in slightly different forms depending on the culture and the geography. But what I what I've learned to use is basically a kind of a stripped down version. So it's kind of what do you call it? Not from any particular culture, but it is the principle based medicine wheel that still kind of looks at the wheel of life, or the wheel of or the process of journey. And so basically, it's a way of making useful distinctions in an otherwise overly complex world of information and knowledge. So taking the skills and practices of early humans that seem to be, if we use the measurement of consistently used over time and been, as we evolved and kept, so and across culture, across ecosystems and stuff, these things that spontaneously arise, for example, the use of fire, and even fire making methods, which is even more interesting. So you have a number of friction fire methods where you make fire without matches, right? And some of these have spontaneously showed up on different continents. Now, whether or not that was shared information way back, or this was the observation of natural laws and just putting it together, and it just spontaneously kind of happened around this. The use of stone tools, the use of medicinal plants, the understanding of tracking, the art of observation and interpretation of the landscape, movement, all of these things. So, when I use the term primal, often it's perceived as being primal, like primitive, right? Like that kind of thing. But actually, definition of primal is more like essential or core or original, right? And so that's the way in which I'm using. So it's looking at the original essential skills and practices that we've human being since remembered, and looking at their essence, kind of distilling them down to the principles rather than the various forms, because there are many. For example, there's many ways of making a friction fire. As far as I know, there's 29 different methods of making fire without matches or a lighter, but all of them are obeying and following the same principles of how fire functions, right? So, for example, fire requires heat, requires fuel, requires oxygen, the fire triangle. So, so all these skills can be looked at from kind of a principal perspective or a primal perspective, and that's how Tom Brand teaches as well, which really kind of awakened me to the idea of primal, because it was like, rather than a list of techniques to try and memorize, or all of these different tools, it's like, no, you look at you understand first principles of how things operate, and then you look at the context that the form arises. So, depending on the need, if you're in the Arctic and you need a shelter, it's going to probably not be a pile of leaves. It's going to have something to do with snow and ice, right? If you're in the Pacific Northwest here and you need a shelter, unless it's strangely heavy snow that winter, you're going to be using probably a pile of leaves. So you look at one more example, the teepee. It emerged in a culture where they needed a shelter that could be mobile. It had to, and their materials was hides of buffalo. So it just, the need was there, shelter. The context was buffalo. We're following this herd all over the place. So the emergent form was a teepee. So that's kind of how I look at and try to teach these skills, is through this. That's kind of the primal. So anyway, the four directions, to answer your question. Um, I, I, and this is was actually given to me, or at least inspired by one of my teachers named Joe Lau, who's he had a program called Natural Duties. Basically, made the distinction four archetypes that we are all embodying at some level, which is perceiver, which would be the information gatherer, information gathering and dispersing. The provider, the take care of basic needs of shelter, water, fire, food, kind of thing. The healer, life preserver, right, and then the protector, the warrior kind of archetype. So those four archetypes are what kind of are the placeholders for the four primal arts direction. So these are just different dimensions of every human, actually, and we all have our interests and our strengths, but these dimensions are there. So anyway, I'm kind of going on and on about that, but I don't know if there's more to that question, or if
Well, I think I heard you say to John that you were working on a way of mapping the four ways of knowing to the four directions, or and just to remind people, if you want to ask a question to Ben, just queue up your question in event text right above the event hall, and just let me know you have a question. If you want me to read your question, just write it out, and I will read it for you. So yeah, so is this, so you said you think the four ways of knowing can roughly map to the four directions, or did I mishear that?
I that is something I'm kind of looking at, and as I study that a little more, I'm kind of tweaking it a bit. But to it takes a little bit of explanation, because the directional model is it's a pretty fluid model, and it's one of those things, like, this is a question I wanted to ask John, actually, and maybe you guys would have some insight on this, but what I've noticed is I've been using the medicine wheel as a navigational tool, if you will, for probably 25 years, and pretty deeply was built the curriculum out of that, really kind of follow, because it's also organized around the seasons. It's organized around the day. It's a scalable kind of representational system of life. So what ends up happening is, like, you start to develop a relationship to what I would call an emergent nature inside of this well, let me give you an example. So the direction east, okay, so the directional, or the medicine wheel, is a spatial representation to start with, but it becomes what we might refer to loosely as an energetic representation as well. So so we have the north, south, east, west. Can you guys see my my whiteboard at all? I can't tell with the way I'm
I
on.
can see. It looks like half of it, probably. I can see that part. Yeah.
Just like a chunk?
Yes.
Okay, so so we have the four directions. Right? Is that too high?
Yeah. No, you're good. Perfect.
Okay, so what happens is, as you you start to associate different things that kind of, east, like, what does east mean? It's a spatial quadrant, right? It's just literally a direction, but they also associated east with sunrise. Now there's a relationship there, because, oh yeah, the sun rises in the east. Well, that's kind of cool. So we have the sunrise, and then it began to be associated with stuff like, okay, well, what is it about that time of day? What's going on? Well, the birds are coming alive, and there's like this fresh energy I feel in the morning because I'm restored, and then I started to look at stuff like, well, what else in a holistic cycle also has what else can we overlay onto this? And so another common association with the East is, actually, if we were to take this as a whole and divide a year, upon it, then we would have spring. Okay, so spring ends up being also over here. And so now we're actually starting to develop a correspondence pattern. You know, we have high noon here because that logically follows sunrise. You know, we have across the axis from sunrise, we have sunset, right? So it's like it takes nature and it looks at whatever's going on, and it kind of immediately kind of just lets it organize around a balanced, holistic template. So we have springtime, we have sunrise, we have east, we have summer, noon, and south. And now, you know, if you spend time, and these are all nature-based representations, right? So, or qualities. So if you line up a bunch of those and you start getting more and more of them, they all start to stack up. You start to get this like world, if you will, that starts to show up in each direction, right? So east is, at this point in my life, because I've been using this for a long time, the east quality that's represented by the icon of east, or the symbol, has all of this meaning and all of this like depth, and there's an element associated, right? There's a whole there's a stage of life associated with it. There's the stage of journey. There's all of these things that start to show up, right? And so, and that's all really cool. I mean, for example, this would be where you might, with this same thing, if we took the journey, the whole journey of a human life, this would be, what would you say?
The sun rising, I guess.
The newborn.
Childhood. Yeah, infancy.
Right. Yeah. So this is the birth area, right? And then it goes around the cycle, and then you have the death area. So you know, you can see it in human life. You can see it in a journey of any project. You know, you have the inspired beginning stage, you have the hard work stage, you have the completion stage, and then you have the actually utilizing the project stage. And then you have the project is no longer relevant and you want to move on, right? So, but all of those things, and here's where kind of, to me, the magic shows up, is what's actually important on this thing is the dotted line that's in between all of those elements. There's like an emergent, I don't have a better word for it, maybe energy, you know, that is represented by the direction now. It's not just all the things anymore. Those were all just forms that got me to associate to a certain feeling. And so there's a something between the lines in the east direction that holds a space for, say, a potential of reality. And same thing in the south and the west and the north. And when you put them all together, you have what feels like a whole. And so that's a really old idea. I mean, another one that's been, yin and yang is a similar thing. It's this very simple, not simple, it's actually complex, but could be seen as pretty simple. It's just polarity, right? But this divides it up into 4. There's also the 7 arrows. There's medicine wheels that have 20 distinctions on them, you know.
So it's symbols for the pattern of life. There's symbols for the pattern of life.
Right. Yeah. So it becomes a navigational tool, for example, when you are, let's say, in the span of this conversation. So we're sitting here, and we have an hour and a half or whatever, and it doesn't correspond precisely with time. That's just a example, but there's a energy, right? There's a flow to the conversation. Right. There's the beginning of things tends to be kind of inspiring, new, and fresh, right? There's this like, oh, what's going to happen? And then there's this like deepening into, now we're into the meat of the stuff, you know. Right. We kind of have a sense of what this is. And then there's usually some sort of a transition time. This would actually be represented by southwest and northeast, which is actually probably more accurately represented by up and down. So we have now 3-dimensional sphere thing. So, but the southwest kind of stage is like, well, there's kind of a crux or a lull or some sort of thing to overcome, like the hard part. And every journey has its hard part, right? So this also maps onto the hero's journey very well, right? So you have the same kind of like process going, and then you have the overcoming and this kind of the completion celebration phase in the West. And then you have the integration and internalization phase, right? So, and then you start over, and it just keeps going. So earlier you asked about transformation. This would be another way that I would describe transformation: is anytime you complete that full circuit of journey, it's not just a circle, you know, it's actually a spiral, right? So you're transcending and expanding upon.
That's great. And I guess the obstacle to overcome now in this conversation is the probing question of Manuel, who has a question for you.
Of what?
Manuel, one of our members, has a question for you. So.
Oh, awesome.
I'm gonna be easy on you. Well, maybe
excellent, thank you.
It's not. It's gonna be non-confrontive at least. So, you talked about growth with Viveki at the start, and you're focusing on growth, and now you're mentioning transformative experience, and well, you're doing it there as well, right? Like we're extending the circle. So one of the things that we've been struggling around with is integration, right? You can have your experience, but if you don't integrate it, it's useless. So I was wondering whether you have any experiences with people actually managing to integrate ideas, or also some insights about people who actually don't manage to integrate things and why that is.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, and I it is something I've thought about a lot, because I agree it's such a missing. It's a blind spot culturally, at least for us Americans. I can't speak for everyone, but it's obvious here. You know, it's like, for example, you see what people want to do is do the exciting, fun new thing in the East, and as soon as it gets hard, they just want to go right to, well, let's just party, let's just celebrate. So we either want to start something new or we just want to party, and that's kind of the that's generally kind of the adolescent stage. You know? It's avoiding the work, and it's certainly not valuing the integration phase of life. So one thing, you know, I've just made it. I have a program here that we do over the course of a year called The Journey, and it's literally just mentoring people along this process through a year. And we have, you know, the seasons, we have all of the things that show up in reality that actually correspond to this whole cycle that we can fall back on. And so our training kind of maps around this, and I use these different stages as they naturally arise. And one of the big ones is, because it's a group environment, is the group field. And the group field, or the group, if you will, goes through an evolution, and or doesn't in some cases, you know. And it's the bringing it to people's awareness, so that when we are encountering these different stages, that we can just make them I guess more conscious, more realized. So, you know, when a group gets together, they're all like, it's that same inspiration, curious, like, who are we? We don't know yet. This is gonna be fun. We're all like, yeah, let's do this. This sounds awesome, you know. And then they get into it a bit, and they get to know each other, and like, well, you know, I don't know, that person kind of bugs me, and I'd rather just kind of do this over here. And there's some avoidance, there's some loss of inspiration, loss of passion. Then there's the breakthrough, where the group actually either forms and becomes a team or does not. And a large part of what makes, just to use that example, a large part of what makes causes the growth to actually happen is creating space, holding the space for this integration part of the cycle. So if I'm working with people, with a group, most people think, like, we have a class or something, or we do an event, And they kind of think that, well, when we cross the finish line, it's done. We're all done, right? And what we do is install practices. We go, okay, now it's time to debrief, right? Now it's time to have little assignments where you go home and you think about what happened. You bring that into your life, and you come back and we talk about it some more. And then we feed that back into where we're going. So, like in a group example, really, I mean, because this half of the cycle, I don't know if this makes sense to you, but this half of the cycle tends to be very concrete and very explicit. This half of the cycle tends to be invisible to people. There's something about it's the yin side. We're a very yang focused culture, so we want to see the thing, we want to see the flash, we want it, right? The quiet, the stillness, the integration, the absorption, not so excited, right? So it's holding the space and representing that, because it's not going to be loud enough to do it by itself. So as an instructor, I have to hold people to respect integration. Another way, really quick, is it's manifested. One that no one can really avoid is like working out. So if you take someone, if we're doing some sort of a workout or movement thing, and you avoid integration, you avoid recovery, it's just not going to work. People are too sore. They're going to end up not growing. They're going to end up falling apart. So there's some very concrete ways that we can encounter the value of integration. And so a lot of what I do is bring in a lot of different ways for people to encounter the same lesson. So if integration is a lesson, we're going to do it through the value of silence, and being in the woods and being still. We're going to do it through recovery with workouts. We're going to do it through the preparation and debriefing stages of a project. So I'm not sure if I answered your question at all, but that's how I really value the stage of integration. And
sounds like you're saying
like
that integration doesn't just happen. So you could do all these practices, but if you don't take active steps to integrate them into your life, you're just playing, but you're not. It's not going to have that transformative effect.
Yeah. No, that's it. You're doing half the circle. You're doing a you're doing a weird this shape. So it won't roll. It won't flow.
So
I agree.
I want to have a couple of clarifications, right? So you're talking about a trajectory of a year. So is that like in the weekends, or like how am I supposed to look at that?
For our program?
Yeah.
Our program is we meet 3 days a week, and then often have weekend stuff as well. So it's
for a full year.
For a full year, yeah. It's like a college course. Yeah. But so we have we're in a very very strong group field, because everyone pours into it and goes for it. And it's very deep and very it's pretty hardcore. But
right. The other thing, right, like the thing that came to my mind is celebration, right? Like the thing is done, and then we need to remember it. We need to give it a place, right? Like, and that brings up rituals. So I was like wondering whether you had some explicit group rituals or personal rituals that you provide to people.
Absolutely, that's a very important thing. The West, to use my model here, is all about honoring, and again, it's only half the cycle. I guess one of the ways, I mean, we do use ritual to answer your question specifically. I have a program that's a rites of passage for young men at ages 12 to 15. They have a week-long experience. It's another one of those kind of microcosm hero's journey is for boys. And if we just were like, okay, you did it, see you later, the ones that just kind of go home after that, and first of all, they're so different. Most of them kind of have some sort of a there's a whole phase of reintegration that we have to honor. It's really important. In fact, it's so important that we actually have to work with the parents before, during, and after, because often the parents just want their kid back. You know? They're like, "Here, fix my kid, and then give him back." Like, whoa, it doesn't work that way. It's like, you realize that if your child changes, you have to change as well, because you are the context for which they live with. So, and often the parents aren't prepared for that or ready for that. But anyway, so we have this training that we do with the parents to help them reintegrate the kid back into their world. And often it has to do with, you know, giving them space, allowing them, creating new rituals. Like maybe it's the perfect chance for them to move into the garage or whatever. If they're moving out, you know, change their bedroom. Like, have the bedroom be different when they get home. Change something in their world so it locks in place this. Similar with, we also run vision quests, which is one of the more powerful work that we do, I feel. So that's a 8-day program, but it's a 4-day solo in the woods where you're fasting. Basically a questing meditation. And afterwards, people come out completely, all of their frameworks are just dissolved. You know, they're just like these raw souls. They're like, okay. And we have to handle that very carefully, and we give them all this coaching to reintegrate. There's a week-long period at least afterwards where you don't want to go right back into the mold. You want to, it's your chance to create the life you want to create in that space. So, and both of those, by the way, to me are rituals or ceremony, the rites of passage and quest. Hope that connects.
Right. So what I'm getting out of there is that you're creating chaos or crisis, as Ravegi was mentioning it, and through the crisis, the identification of potential becomes possible, and it's not obvious, right? Like, you still need to harness the potential in order to manifest it in people's life. So yeah, I really like that conceptualization. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah, remove the constraints, allow chaos to occur, create a new signal, and then reinstall constraint.
Mark, you had a question.
Desired constraint.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
No, I have like a 4-hour dissertation that we could go over, but I'll try to keep it to a question.
Look me up sometime, Mark.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you in depth about all kinds of things related to the work we're doing here. But I'll try to keep this within your realm or within the immediate realm. We'll say. I love the medicine wheel, by the way. Always been a fan of it. Didn't really understand.
Okay.
Maybe I understood it in the past and forgot or something. But when you were saying that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. There's this tool there that's always been there. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that sort of thing. I've actually often wanted to wander off and go teach Native Americans at the reservations. It was always a dream of mine. But anyway, yeah, I always felt connected to them for some reason. So, you're talking about this in the context of the wheel, which I think is great. That's really useful. And then we have this concept that we've been working with in relation to John's 4 types of knowing. And, you sort of indicated, like, you're using the most beautiful language around signals and stuff. It's just, it gives me goosebumps. So yeah, much love for signals here. So you're talking about, look, when you get on the Western side here, this is where people start to have problems, right? They start to lose track or be unable to cohere or something like that. And so I wanted you to talk about that, but let me just give you a little bit more context. So one of the things we've been talking about, actually, one of Mark's crazy crusades is that, people they do drugs, right? They do LSD or shrooms or whatever, and they have what we're now able to label a profound experience, right? A profound experience, and then they can't take it back, like they can't integrate. right? That's to Manuel's point about integration. And then it's like, well, we don't know what that is. And we've got all these theories about, well, maybe the change happened too fast, or you didn't have the affordances, to use John's terms, that were able to bring it back. But like, I'm not the only one that sees this, thank goodness, because people are arguing with me. And I'm like, how many people I know a lot of people take hallucinogenic drugs, man, and most of them are the same jerks they were before they started, right? We'll say, and
Yeah, yeah,
except they shove it in your face that they had its deviance and you didn't, and
right.
it's like, oh my goodness, so it seems to me like those two things are related, like this idea that on this half you can't sort of get that integration because you're not seeing that signal, we'll say, right? You're not hearing that signal or feeling that signal, or like probably all of it, right? Right, and so I take it from your nodding that you're right on board with me here about this whole, like, okay, so to that end, we're constantly obsessed. It's one of the sort of our dragons of the apocalypse here, around integration and what that is, and how to facilitate that. So what sorts of things are you doing, do you think, that help boost that signal on that side? And I'm going to assume, and maybe I'm presuming, that is part of the integration process. And in our model, that would be something like everything on the right side of the wheel is scientifio or something, right? It's the scientific worldview, it's the propositional and the procedural in John's world, and everything on the other side, we're mapping to participation. John would call it perspectival. We call it parabolic. We have the perspectival somewhere else. All that stuff maps kind of in a weird way, right? In a mysterious way. So what are the things that you do to sort of engender that other side, which we roughly refer to as religio, which is a bastardization of John's meaning, I'm sure of that. But that's sort of where we're going with it. So of your practices, can you nail down a few that maybe sit on that side and help that process go through? Because I would just be thrilled to understand that if you understand it well enough to explain it, we'll say.
I'll give it a stab here. Um, yeah, so I guess what's interesting is the way I've received the teaching, say, not necessarily how that's even before I've trained in them and embodied them in my own way, my own experience, but the teachings themselves, specifically from Tom, there is it's like, I think they don't, the distinction between what we might call the physical and the spiritual skills, or that kind of, or those dimensions, they are passed on and taught in a whole package, right? They're taught as one fusion. And so this comes from a culture and a time, I would say, where it was almost like that distinction was not there. Would that be the pre-axial? Am I on the right track there with John's work? So the
that
two
would be
before the two worlds,
like two worlds, right? And then
right? Yeah.
the trick that John pulls is he insists that we cannot live with the two worlds mythology. And that, by
Right.
the way, is where I part ways with John immediately, and that's where he starts the series too, which is really frustrating. But
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Okay.
he says we can't live with two worlds mythology, and I say, whoa, like that doesn't sound right to me even a little bit. Why not, right? But he
Uh-huh.
starts there as an axiom, and fair enough, like you're entitled to your axioms.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
disagree with the axiom. So yeah, that would be
Gotcha.
the same sort of thing. Yeah, you're right on. You're right on that
Okay.
with that. Absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, so that seems like there is and the way I kind of, the metaphor I use when talking about that is kind of as, maybe it's we perceive it as two worlds, but it's more like a horizon. So it's a falling away point that's it seems like a line, but really you just sail towards it and it keeps going, right? So at some point we're in both. But anyway, regardless, the teachings are taught in a way, the skills, I should say, the hard skills, even the physical skills, are taught in a way that they're they're infused with spiritual meaning, depth. So, for example, making a fire. Okay, so to build a fire, you can just, if you're cold and you need a fire, you can just grab a bunch of wood, throw it on the ground, dump some gas on it, throw a lighter at it, boom. You kind of have this messy, kind of crappy fire that might kind of work, but there's no respect and there's no honoring of this element and this tool that has sustained us and kept us going. And so by adding respect and adding honor and gratitude just as a starting point, there's a deepening that happens. A relationship begins to form. And now when people build a fire from this place of what I would call connection through gratitude, connection through respect, through awareness, the fire begins to take a different shape. And it takes a shape that's actually more functional because it's built in a slower, more methodical way and more mindful way. And even to the point in ceremony where you might take each piece of wood and you might even go through a symbolic 7 arrows or medicine wheel like dance with this wood or gesturing with this wood, and it fuses your awareness into what you're doing, right? And as you're building this fire, this thing emerges that is so beautiful and so functional, because I think those two are very related, that by the time you're done, you have this thing it's a work of art. It's full of respect and it's got this. It's essentially built from a whole different place, and it's a physical and spiritual experience. So it's no longer just this thing that serves me on a physical level. It's actually got meaning. It's got this connection to it. Anyway, so all the skills are that way. The making of pottery has a story. The making of fire, the fire making process with the bow drill is the story of creation. And that's how it's taught, and that's how it's passed on. So you're not just doing one thing. You're actually doing this embedded, like, mythological or teaching as you're doing the thing, and so it slows you down to where there is physical practice and integration and teaching and all this stuff's happening at the same time. So that's just one thing I wanted to say is there's an approach to practice, whether it's physical skills or whatnot, that it can become so enriching and so multidimensional as you're doing it, that all of these things are happening at the same time. It's like, I guess the word that comes to me is it becomes meaningful. Kind of cool. So that's just one example of, when there was always that kind of care and attention put into the skill. And the beauty of that is that it was a life supporting effort. So, and it always blew my mind too, to think of like, okay, so you have these people living in a subsistence level, direct feedback from the earth. Like, there's no credit cards, there's no like buffers, right? You mess up, you miss that shot and don't get that deer, your family's hungry, you make one wrong move. Now, they were so familiar with their environment that those kind of mistakes, probably didn't happen as often as just us running out there and trying to figure it out, right? It was just home for them. It's like, yeah, this is what I do. They're all professionals at it. So.
And by the way, I put a link in event text of if it's the right video that where you could watch Ben doing some of this stuff, or swinging through trees and lighting a fire without any gas or a lighter, just by rubbing sticks and leaves. So you guys can watch that after, and I'll put a link in the YouTube
Cool.
Notes as well with that.
Right on. So I don't know if I don't know if I'm in the neighborhood of what you're saying there, but so the idea of fusion, that there is no distinction, I think is a useful one. Like, there is a way to practice in a way that's whole, and so, but all of those things, rather than just like, okay, I'm gonna knock this out and then try to integrate it. I'm going to do it at a pace that allows integration to occur as it's happening. So that's the slowness and the mindfulness. I think, culturally, we just try to do stuff too fast. We're just too fast, And if you go out and do some survival training, meaning you go out and try and take nothing with you, go out in the woods and have some skill, have some knowledge, but you try to camp out and just find your food and try to purify water and make a shelter and make a fire. In that process, it's so humbling, first of all. But what happens is your metabolism downshifts a bit, you know, you slow down, you get more present, all these things just naturally start to open up. We actually return to what I feel is more of a human baseline. What we're doing out here in our everyday world, I think, is a little different, and I've experienced that over and over. There's such a difference. So anyway, the slowing down allows integration to be revealed because there's actually a space for it. If you're going too fast, you're gonna overrun it. You know, it's like next thing. It's like no.
But then we wouldn't have Google.
Honor transition. Yeah, right. So yeah, we're all being super conditioned around this pace that just eliminates the possibility of integration. But so one more thing I wanted to say was the honoring of transition. So noticing transition areas, noticing transition points in nature. You know, if you're walking through the woods or an animal is walking through the woods and you're observing it, whenever it comes to a change in the baseline. So if it's walking through the deep forest and it comes to the edge of a field or something, it doesn't just trot out there, right? It pauses every time. Maybe the predators once in a while, but they will pause, you know. It pauses, it assesses, it takes in this new baseline, and then it starts to proceed in a way that's appropriate to that context. And the same thing. And so that can be done. That's just a principle that can be done at every level.
But talking about integration then, for the people who you train in this way, when they come back to the urban world, which doesn't operate at that slower pace, are they able to slow down, and does it help them in the fast-paced urban environment, or do you run into conflict then, because the urban environment just does run at that fast pace?
Yeah. You know, I don't know. I would say I probably have a small sample of to go on that, but I think well, kind of like, you know, we're talking about the hallucinogenics. It's like, to me, that's a state versus stage conflict. States are free, stages are earned. So you can have a state and experience something and be like, yeah, I had that, but you don't have it. You don't actually own it. The way you own it is the years of meditation and transformation, all that stuff, you know, the slow journey. So I think it varies on the person's dedication, the person's practice. You know, it's all those things. I don't think there is a free hack. You know, I think it's going to be an earned quality that where just as any distraction, someone who's in the middle of an urban environment, if they have the pace of nature within them through what we call dirt time, which is like actual contact with the earth and practice, that they're unshakable. It doesn't matter where they are. My teacher, Tom Brown, he lives in New Jersey. He lives in Lakewood, New Jersey, you know, and he lives in a little bit of on the edge of a township, right? The man seems unshakable to me. Every time he's in the woods, he's in that same cadence, that same approach, you know. But he's been dedicatedly practicing that his whole life. So I think what the life-saving thing for me are the ritual of sacred area or sit spot, meditation, and actually another one is tracking, because tracking is a skill set that causes you to almost live in a way that's, I don't want to say outside of reality, but it's in a it's not in a reactive state. You're living within a journey in a state of mystery. So
I wanted
I'm bouncing
to
around now.
Wait,
So you were talking about some sort of emotional stability or grounding that's granted, right? And also the disruption of the crisis that happens, right? So I was wondering if you've had experience with the other side, right, where people are psychologically not able to deal with it, or do you have like a way of weeding those people out, or like?
Could you say that one more time?
The idea that like I can imagine, right, for example, right, like when you hold down at every transition or whatever, right, like that is a place where the demons show up, right, like that's
Okay.
the moment where you're having to face yourself, and some people just don't seem to be able to do that. So I was wondering if you had experience with that.
Yeah, I think um, what I'm offering is available. I think it's accessible to everyone, to humans. I don't think there's any particular group, but it's humans that want to do the work. So um, yeah, I mean, I see that all the time. I see people bounce out immediately. People come to a class and just like, yep, boing, didn't quite get through the surface. But at the same time, it's cool because I don't any contact with the earth is at least in a small way transformative. If someone comes out and takes their shoes off and walks around in the woods for a little bit and goes, that was crazy, my feet were cold, I'm never doing that again, they didn't get the value that it didn't transfer. They have now, you know, they have a potential experience. They have a doorway. A door has been opened, So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I think yeah, I see that a lot.
so Solid has a question.
People respond
Oh,
different ways.
sorry.
Some people.
Yeah, so Solid has a question. Can you ask Ben to share an experience, if it's not too personal, where this four directions view brought him insight into his life or the experience itself?
Man, so much it's hard to distinguish actually, because I like I said, it's trained into me in a way that it's a guiding thing. So a specific experience, it just happens all the time. I would say on the integration subject, that's one area that I find it to be the most useful, because often if I'm trying to get through a project, and personally I thrive in big picture. I thrive in um, kind of the well, there's more aspects to this. There's more directions here, but so there's the stages of inspiration. There's a stage of motivation. There's a stage of perspiration. A stage of celebration. Integration, and all the way around to use all the. But so and each of us have our own personality style or attributes that allow us to be strong in certain areas and weak in others. So one way that I use it, and I can't really think of a specific at the moment, but is to recognize my own blind spots. Because when I'm approaching a problem to solve it, I will tend to go to the big picture perspective, which would be typically held in. And I have a good friend who works with me sometimes, who's very gifted in the South. And so it took me a while to, and he's extremely very good at being able to focus and just make the world disappear and get into like this detailed minutia forever and just track along. And he's an artist too, and he comes up with amazing stuff. He's very good at what he does. But it drives me crazy because I'm just like, oh, that would bog me down, and that kind of thing. So, so being able to, and this is kind of an example, by the way, of how personality typology also matters for the medicine. So I'm able to, when I'm working with him, honor that, yeah, there's a polarity here. This is a necessary duality or dual role, and I need him to help me see what I'm missing, and I need to fill in that part that he needs to work with, and helps us be a better team because I don't expect him to be in my world, and I don't try to be in his world. I just recognize that both are valuable. So that's one example. There's also, in many ways, the four directions kind of help you see around corners as to what might be coming next. Because if let's say I'm having a real good flow, a real good awesome stretch in a project or some sort of journey. My wife and I just went on a 5-day backpacking trip up in our Olympic Mountains, which was just phenomenal. And there's stages of that journey as a little microcosm that were kind of the hard part. It was like, okay, this is the crux. Here we are. This is the decision point. Are we going to go this way? We're going to go this way. It's raining. We're going to continue. We're going to make this happen. And so, just having that medicine wheel mindset or those directions, I could feel the quality of what was coming up. I could feel like we'd passed inspiration. We were into the work, and I could feel that southwest kind of, this is the test, and I recognized it, And so I was able to, we had a little talk about it, and we were able to decide to carry on, and we were able to end up having a pretty amazing time. I mean, we could have made any choice at that moment, right? Of course, but so that was just another, it comes up constantly because it's that energetic field. I can feel that we're in this place, this area. So we need to move from that place instead of trying to be inspired. No, I'm not inspired anymore. I need to be where I am. So
it's great, Mark. I think
thanks for asking.
I've intuited Mark has a follow-up to his prior question.
Yes, my now former friend Brett Manuel sort of stole some of my thunder there. So yeah, just sort of riffing off what we were talking about there, and actually this is very helpful, the actual time as well as your explanation around how you use the wheel there. First off, I want to say John's short form definition of religio is connectedness. So, a little weird here. Yeah. I was like, whoa.
That's cool.
Yeah, that is kind of cool. I'm warming up to that short form. I've still got some objections with it, but boy, it's a good short form, and it seems to come up a lot, especially in relation to the things that we think are related to religio. We'll say, right? It's like the core component or something. So like your answer was very helpful, because one of the things that I think Manuel and I in particular have been looking at is like, well, we've got an overboosted signal on this side. How do we boost the signal on that side? And then, they'll level out. And what you sort of said was, yeah, don't do that. Just like do the whole thing together at the right pace, and the signals will work themselves out. And I can kind of see that, right? And then, I guess Brett's follow up, to give him a little bit of credit for stealing some of my thunder, we'll say, was helpful, because you sort of said, yeah, there's issues around all of this, right? And people do bounce out because they can't get into the groove, we'll say, with some of the mindfulness and such, not that you were talking about, that you think engenders some of this integration, which I sort of agree with. This is very like John's meditation series. That's like, he starts there, right? He starts with mindfulness pretty much, right? He gets you to the core four, right? Gets you right into mindfulness as quick as we can, right? And I have my doubts about that too, but I'm really prepared to be wrong on that, because I'm not sure that that's not correct. So I'm wondering if these people who bounce, for example, like maybe their problem is that they do need a grounding or something to boost that we'll call it the left side signal, right? Because that's how it looks to you, to my screen here, right?
Okay.
Maybe they need some way to do that or prepare that. I guess it wouldn't be boosting the signal so much as, John talks about affordances. And so Manuel and I, for example, have been looking at how do we create affordances for that side, for what we call religio, basically, but for that side of the board. And so it seemed to me like this idea of slowing down, and then the thing you mentioned a lot too was story, and I that's just like, we love narrative here. John seems to have a lot of issues with narrative, but narrative's like one of those things we're all about in some sense. So cohering that narrative to that side seems like important, because telling of the story and acting out the story all takes more time than just throwing the gas on and throwing down the lighter just to look
Right,
at
right,
the match,
right.
rather just to look cool, we'll say. Right. So
Yeah, yeah.
so you're refocusing on, like I mean, that's an apt analogy, right? So like I look cool because it's all about me,
Right,
right?
right.
Yeah. And it's not about you, it's about this survival that you have to engender, really, right? Because you're in communication with the fire, and the fire's in communication with you. When I go camping, I'm in communication with the fire. I mean, I can't prove that, but I'm telling you, if you went camping with me and I managed the fire, you would see it. I'm probably not as good as you by any means, but I'm way better than everybody else I know. I have no idea what that is, but yeah, I can watch that fire
That's cool.
and it talks to me. It definitely talks to me. I've had whole arguments with people about, no, don't move that log there. And they're like, no, that's the thing to do. And I'm like, no, watch this. And they're like, wow. I'm like, yeah, I don't know how I know that, but I couldn't teach it to you, but yeah, it's clear to me. So I'm wondering, like, is there something that you notice, or is there some aspect of your practices there that maybe where you're either changing the affordances or boosting that signal on the, we'll call it the problematic side of the equation, that and that maybe gives us more insight, because you've given me a ton of insight, by the way, thank you so much, on what maybe we can do to get people to the stage where they want to engage with you or Rafe Kelly, or people, right? Because the big problem in my mind is people don't even want to go outside, or when they go outside they don't want to engage with the outside as the outside.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking for a doorway in there that would sort of like
Interesting.
lead people to your work, right? It would be pre your work. So I just didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, or if you wanted to take your time to think about it, because it's a relatively tough question, I realize too. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of currently things going against us in that way, if you will, and part of what I was referring to with the conditioning to be faster, faster, faster. First of all, but and the desire to be inspired and just party, inspired party, inspired do this axis and not do the journey. So the more real answer I feel that I've stumbled across would be continuously highlighting awareness of process versus um, product. So really, a lot of what I'm doing is helping people honor transition, awareness of process, seeing the value of the space in between things, and getting into more of the kind of it's really the complexity and systemic mindset than the concrete reductionist. Just give me the thing. I it's like, if someone wants to learn something, instead of just telling them how to do it, which just kills it for them. There's a story of Tom Brown. No, I'm sorry. One of his one of my other teachers who was a student. Basically, if someone goes, "What kind of bird is that?" A kid comes up to you, "What kind of bird is that?" And you go, "Oh, it's a robin." They're like, "Oh," and they're just done. They move on. It's like end of story. There's no more relationship. So what I try to do is build the relationship part. I don't care what the bird is. I don't care. It's like, yeah, whatever, cool. This, to me, it's an opportunity. Let's build this relationship. Let's build a channel right now. So I will ask them questions that will start to afford a relationship for them, right? Where they start to become curious and get into and just expand this world of, maybe it's a robin, but it's, well, what's it doing? What's it got in its mouth? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And so now they're seeing new features. So I kind of label that, put that all under emphasizing relationship, the space in between, transition, awareness of process, right? And these are the things I try to highlight as valuable, because they just aren't heroic enough for people these days. They're not they're not the shiny things. They're the invisible stuff, you know. So I use a lot of language from systems thinking, complexity theory and stuff too. I feel like, especially for intellectual folks, it really creates a bridge, because they start to value, it's like, oh yeah, that's a tree is actually a flow of material. It's not just a thing. No, that's cool, you know, that kind of thing. It's kind of mind-blowing and fun. And the other thing is to try and remind people that they already know this stuff. So in terms of the primal skills, to some degree, they're already trackers. They already know how to, I mean, we're healing all the time. Like, that's just spontaneous. That's just self-adaptation. And just bring them into contact with the laws of nature that will that also carry over and are relevant to their everyday life. For example, I use the concept of entropy a lot as a teacher. What is survival? Well, survival is resisting entropy. And so
I was going to say, before I saw Mark smile, I was going to say, you're about to make Mark smile. He talks about it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So yeah, that's a big, you know, I kind of in story form let it be the monster that's devouring the universe, right? But the resistance of entropy is survival, you know, or stress at least, and managing stress is survival, and that's how we kind of talk about it. So, and those kinds of things can cross any cultural, environmental barrier or boundary and be relevant right now. I mean, maintaining your car is survival, right? Shelter, water, fire, food are the what we call the sacred order of survival. Shelter, water, fire, food. Well, if you're here right now on this call, you have successfully accomplished shelter, water, fire, food. You're doing it. You know, a lot of it actually pretty easily. It's just a little harder to see, and it's happening. So, trying to make it relevant with principles that transcend or can flow through different boundaries, emphasizing process and awakening, making people feel like they don't have to be a certain person or they don't have to deserve this stuff. They already have it. They're human, you know. There's no special thing you got to be or do or anything. It's like you're already doing that, you know. So those are some of the things I use, I think, to help in teaching and mentoring, help bridge for the folks that think it's maybe not their thing or they're too far away.
Yeah, that was excellent. I mean, this sort of goes back into this concept we've been playing with called historical grounding. And so sort of what you're saying is you have historical grounding because you're here and you survived. And, you know, the people before you fought entropy, right? And you're constantly fighting entropy. And there's a daily fight with entropy. There's a weekly fight, a monthly fight, right? There's this ongoing fight at multiple time cycles, we'll call them, of entropy that might fit into your spiral somehow. I don't know, but it seems a weird coincidence,
well,
right?
Here's the cool thing is entropy is the engine of the spiral.
Right.
It drives the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because we are reducing entropy locally, increasing it externally, right? In order to keep this whole thing going, because life's swimming upstream against the river.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I like how you say, you know, you connect people with say, look, you already know how to do this, right? You've always known how to track or whatever, right? You already have these skills. You were born with these skills, right? They were granted. So that implies they were granted to you from your parents, right? And where did they get them? Well, from their parents, right? So that gives you this recursive, reciprocal, historical grounding, and that's going to be infinitely helpful. And thank you for that. This is just great. This is great stuff. This is really going to help us, I think. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well,
thank
fun.
you.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. I mean, I have other questions that I'd love to get into. I wanted to ask you about embracing mystery and sacred questioning, but I think there's enough of what I want to ask you that we could fill a whole other session. So I'd love to have you back to dig. This has been just a delight. It's been just a great conversation, and Thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about, I think I saw on your website that you said you're starting, most of your stuff is done on location in Washington, but you're starting to get into some online stuff. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I don't, unfortunately right now I don't have a team that's helping with that part of this. So this is me figuring this out. I do have a few people I consult with, but so it's a slowly developing process, but I do have, probably the main thing I'm working on right now is what I'm calling the Primal Lab. And it's a series of, well, it's actually an online version of what we do during our journey program, which is a series of weekly exercises, one in 4 different labs. So the Primal Lab's like the overarching. So, so there's a body lab, which is all about awareness, movement, and conditioning, in the sense of making contact with the earth, not conditioning in terms of toughness. It's actually all about resilience. It's different than toughness. And so body lab, earth lab, which is the primitive skills or skills of survival and tracking primarily. And then soul lab, which is skills of healing and caretaking. The skill set we refer to as healing the earth, working with the land. And then finally, Hero Lab, which is the one of my specialties through martial arts and stuff, is the protector archetype. So it's working the skill, basic martial arts training, ethical training that corresponds with that. So yeah, those are something to watch for. They're kind of sneaking out, gradually. I wish I had something I could just point you guys at and invite you to, but other than that, I have a series, Zoom interview series with some great resources that are teachers and friends and colleagues of mine that are all in this kind of primal world that I'm part of. And I started that. It's called Primal Perspective, and that's how I got in touch with John. Actually, I invited him to talk on one of our episodes. That's the other thing that's online. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but I do coaching and consulting for anyone who's working in this kind of dimension, or is working on building something, or just an assistant.
And so what's the best way for people to reach you? Tribal Life, tribaledge.life?
Yeah, my contact info's on there. There's various, basically, probably the best way is to do, it's just a free consultation where we just have like a 20 to 30 minute call, and we're chat and just see what you're looking for and how I might be able to support you. And my email's on there and phone's on there and all that stuff.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been great. We definitely. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I just remembered. I did start a Patreon thing. I'm new on Patreon, so basically made a membership tier there, which is where the online stuff's going to start to steer. That's basically the access, and it's called Hero Lab.
Right, so I'll post links to your YouTube channel and to your website in the show notes. So again, thank you so much for being here. This has been great. I would love to have you back at some point down the road. I think there's lots to talk about, and it was just the tip of the iceberg tonight. So thank you so much for being here.
Right on.
And thank you everyone.
Thank you all. Yeah. And really enjoyed meeting you. I hope to see you on Discord and get the hang of this a little better.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. You're welcome to come by here anytime. We're always people hanging out, and cool. Again, I'd like to see this Discord as a sort of a hub between the different groups that are out there who are all working on their own versions of the meaning crisis, their own solutions to the meaning crisis. So, having a place where everybody can come together and share, that's what we want to do here. So again, thank you everyone for being here. We've got a few more Q&As this week. Tomorrow night at 6:30 Eastern, John's going to be back for his monthly Q&A. He was sick last week, so he's rescheduled to tomorrow. And Wednesday night at 6 Eastern, we've got Greg Enriquez or Enrique's, who's going to be here. Sorry, Siri just came on. Greg Enrique's going to be here following his 5-episode Voices with Vervaeke series. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about there. So thank you everyone for being here. And please, if you're listening on YouTube, like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time. Have a great night, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you, Ben. Come again soon. We're here.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.